My name is David Sanford, and I am the Regional Sales Director for Carlson Software in the South Central part of the United States. The subject of today's webinar is tips and tricks for preparing drawings for surface model building in Carlson Software. And today's webinar is hosted by Jennifer DiBona of That CAD Girl. Jennifer's been one of our top resellers since she formed her company back in 2007, based primarily on training and consulting services. But Jennifer has over 20 years of experience working with AutoCAD and AutoCAD-based software. That CAD Girl is a member of Carlson College. And Jennifer has 15 years of experience as a trainer as well. Today's webinar, again, is focusing on tips and tricks for surface model building. So this is a webinar today is going to, it's beneficial for both new users and advanced users of Carlson software. She'll start at the beginning and show you some of the initial setup routines that'll make your make the process much more smoother, including drawing cleanup. Jennifer will demonstrate how this routine will help you get started, weed out some of that bad data, and get your drawing, help you get your drawing size down to a much more manageable size. She'll also show us some routines for elevating 2D line work, like pads and curb lines, into 3D. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please type them in on the question bar. After the webinar, if you think of a question, please contact Jennifer or myself. You can see our contact information there. And also please visit Jennifer's website, That CAD Girl. There's a lot of useful information contained on Jennifer's website, and you can reach it at www.thatcadgirl.com. Or send her an email if you have a question. I look forward to viewing myself today and learning a few tips and tricks. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and let her take it away. Jennifer?
All right, great, Dave. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, now I'm going to show my screen here, and thanks for the welcome. And I hate to say that I'm going to have to correct a couple of things. What I've ended up doing on this, the drawing cleanup, I won't be showing today, and I will be doing a little bit of elevating, but I actually was going a little more manual route with this, just for the sole fact that we've been doing a lot of webinars lately, and I know I've actually shown that in other webinars here recently. So if you have any questions on that, there are plenty of recorded versions, or like Dave said, you can follow up with me afterward, and I'm happy to go through that. But like I said, this is a little bit more manual, and what we're going to look at, this is really geared toward the person that has to take a drawing that they've been given from someone else, and how to fight your way through that. Everyone does their drawings in a different way. So Dave's covered a lot of this, but I've got a couple of slides of my own just for housekeeping for Carlson and myself. Did want to mention that sign up and registration has already started for Carlson's user conference to be held this November in Louisville, Kentucky. And you can sign up and find out more on Carlson's website. You can see we're going to have some in-depth classes. I think Dave's teaching. I'll be teaching a couple of classes. And that final day is going to be dedicated to two very in-depth classes on point clouds and the CSI software. Upcoming Carlson webinars, and you can again sign up for these at Carlson's website. On September 16th, we've got Carlson Takeoff, What's New for 2011, and that will be presented by Todd Carlson of Carlson Software. On the 23rd of September, new opportunities for GIS using Carlson, I think it's the Carlson desktop products, ServCE, and then also the new integration with the SRI. Gary Rosen with Carlson will be presenting that along with Brent Jones of ESRI. And then on September 30th, it's kind of the preview and highlights and what you can expect to see in Carlson 2011. And then upcoming training classes that I have, again, you can find out more at my website. On September 20th and 21st, I have a 2-day My Company Standards being held in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is 2 days on site in the classroom, but we will also spend some time online in a session beforehand, because My Company Standards is meant for you to bring your own plans for CAD standards, whether you have them to whatever degree you have them. You may not have any at all, but in your office, if you've really tried and want to get yourself to a company standard regarding layers, line types, text, we can do custom line types, symbol libraries, and so that time we spend online before the class will be for me and you to go through what kind of information you already have started and what you need to bring with you. And then preparing again for the 2011 release of Carlson, I've got what I'm calling launch parties and also a field demo with the Surveyor Plus RTK GPS unit in Atlanta, Georgia, Columbia, South Carolina, and Richmond, Virginia. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on and get into the presentation. So again, the surface modeling data that we're going to work with here, I've got 2 different drawings that are real projects that I've stripped out the identifiers, but they are drawings that have come to us, me and some of my customers, that we've had to fix in order to get a good surface model to go out the door for staking or machine control, or in some cases estimating in volumes. So where to start? We will, again, I expect to, for those of you that are brand new to this, that have never done it and trying to figure out what you're going to be hit with, I think you'll get a lot of good information. And then also, hopefully those that have been doing it for a while will pick up some tips and tricks. So the first thing that I'll mention is that when you first get the drawings from whoever the designers are, you're going to check that drawing's composition. And what do I mean by that? A lot of times when, especially for larger projects, you will have data and drawing information in totally separate drawings that are then, they use what we call external references to reference pieces and parts of the project in one drawing into another drawing. So for instance, there may be a base drawing that has the new building, the new parking, the geometry, the existing information, and then they will externally reference that into another drawing for the grading plan, where the notes and the actual proposed contours and things like that. So there are as many different ways to organize a set of drawings as there are people out there probably. So you really want to look for that. And then another thing to check is how the paper space and model space is organized. So let's look at a drawing that I have open, and you can see here that I'm in the layout view or the layout tab of this drawing, and I can see my title block information. I can see my project area here, and when you switch over to model space, this is really I'd say where the majority of your drawings are going to be. You're going to find most of it here. So the first thing we'll look for, I'm going to type in the command xref, and the xref palette shows up. And if there were any other files x-referenced into this, I would see them listed, and it would tell me the type of reference. So there isn't anything. Everything's contained in this one drawing, so nothing to work with here. And then the second thing is, how is model space and paper space being used? Well, we have entities in both. I would say in at least 50% of the cases, all of your project information will be here in the model tab, but every once in a while we'll find some actual entities that are important to us, information that's important to us in the paper space. So one way to see that, and I'm just going to do an erase and select the viewport that is showing me all that information on my model. And when I erase the viewport, you can see that all of these notes and such exist as live information in my paper space or in my layout tab. So I actually need that viewport back, so I'm going to undo. I just did that because it's an easy way to see what we may be missing. And when I switch over to model, I don't see any of that same information. So we have a case here where some of the notes that are very important to us, such as top of curve, bottom of curve information, exists only in paper space, and I need to get that over to model space, because when I'm working with it, I'm not worried about it being pretty. I'm not worried about putting out, when we're here, we are worried about putting together a good surface model, not how nice the drawings are going to look. So one reason I'm doing this in AutoCAD today is simply for one command, and the command is change space. So I just typed it in, CHSPACE, and it's going to allow me to put a window, and I'm just going to get right inside that viewport. Actually, I think I can go outside, it doesn't matter. And I pick my enter key, and you can see that the viewport's actually become current. I'll switch back over to my model tab, and you can see that all of that same information has been automatically moved. And for those of you that are very familiar with paper space, you may also see that it's applied a scale factor, which is really nice. It puts it right where it was supposed to be, right in that model view, so it's accessible to me. Okay, so that's just one of the little tips I would recommend that you take advantage of. So I like that one. It's a big time saver. So I'll switch back over to my PowerPoint, and let's look at the next one. So the next thing we want to pay careful attention to is to check the drawing position, rotation, orientation, and scale. So let's first, we'll switch again back over to the drawing. So how do I check its orientation? Well, I'm going to start off, I need to do a few checks here. So first thing, I'm here in my sheet drawing or my layout drawing, paper space, it's all the same. And I have a north arrow. So I see the north arrow goes straight up. So that's actually a very good thing. When I double click inside that model space, I can also see in this little icon, and I need to see both, I see Y pointing straight up or north, and I see X pointing to the east, and I also see that little square at the bottom left. So those three things tell me that this drawing has probably not been rotated. It's still not absolute, but probably got about a 99% chance that nothing's been rotated. So what do I mean when I say rotated? Well, if you consider that a lot of projects may be very long in the north-south direction, but the sheets we need to plot on are wider in the east-west direction, when you're putting a good plan set together, usually what a designer will do is rotate that drawing so that you can get more of the project area on a sheet. So that's really one thing that before you do too many updates, too many changes, too many fixes for your surface model, you really need to make sure where this project is in your CAD file. So those are the two checks. And then kind of by the same token, we switch over to model, and we see that same icon here with the X, the Y, and then again, the little square in the bottom left means it's in the world coordinate system, which means it hasn't been rotated. So if that's really new to people, on my website, on the support page, I have actually got under the AutoCAD handouts, there's actually one called Drawing Orientation that goes through UCS rotation, D-view twisting. There's a couple of methods, so you can learn a little bit more about that and kind of see if that little square's not there, what else might you do. So, I believe at this point that we are oriented properly. North is north. Next, we also wanted to check the scale. So, and the position. So position means what are the coordinates? Well, as I move my mouse around, you can see in the bottom left corner, these are the coordinates. This is the X, the Y, and the Z of my mouse as it moves around. And my go to meeting just popped back up, so collapse that again. So one thing that I'm seeing in those coordinates, it's not coordinates that as an engineer or a surveyor or even a contractor that I would be used to seeing because it says inches. So that's one indicator that we need to look for and pay attention to. When we see feet and inches or feet and fractions of feet, we've got to watch for that. So we see the coordinates are different. We're going to look at one other thing. I'm going to zoom in. What you need to find are 2 points that you know the distance between them. Now these are parking stripes, and I don't know specifically the distance between them, but I know it should be 8 or 9 feet. So if I do a distance, and I've got my object snaps turned on, and I check that, you can see that it also returns 9 feet 0 inches. If I also can find maybe a property bearing and check the distance there, so I'll check between the center of that corner iron and here, and you can see what kind of a distance I get. So instead of 77.98 feet, I see I don't want to do that math. So if I don't want to do the math, I'm going to go to Settings and Units Control, and I can see that it's been set to architectural. Most likely this plan was done from an architect or a landscape architect. So I'll pick decimal. This is a linear units, is going to show it now and return it now in a decimal format instead of feet and inches. Look at my coordinates in the bottom left. So I'm now in the 10,000, 1,700 range. If I check that distance again now between these two corners, now it gives me something that's a little more recognizable. So, well, not quite recognizable. Now it's telling me 935 feet. So, now where do we go? Well, let's do some math. So I'll pull up my little handy-dandy calculator. And if I look at 935.73712, and I divide that by what I know it should be, 77.98 feet, I get right at 12, a factor of 12 different. Okay, and that's pretty much what you know it's going to be. This is a very common problem. If I also check the distance here, it's going to come up to 108 feet. So 108 divided by 12 does come up to 9 feet. So the issue that we have here is that this was done by an architect or a landscape architect. When architects draw in AutoCAD, their base unit that they draw with is an inch. As surveyors, engineers, surveyors, engineers, contractors, when we put a drawing together, our base unit will be a foot. So the base unit for for every one of our base units, there are 12 base units for an architect. We need to scale this thing down by a factor of 1/12. Before we do that, there are two things we need that are very, very critical before you take this step. One, the coordinate system. Watch the coordinate system. Chances are, if you have to scale it, you're going to mess up the coordinate system. This is in about a 10,000, 10,000 base, so it's an assumed coordinate system anyway. But even if you're at grid units, what I'm going to show you, hopefully it'll still keep you where it's supposed to be. But you may end up just having to pick everything up and just move it from one point to another point to get on the same control system that's been established in the field. The other thing we need to make sure of is we see a lot of things on this drawing, but we need to make sure before we scale it up or down, before we move it, we need to make sure we don't have anything frozen. And you can see that we have a lot that's frozen. We may have things that are turned off. So I'm going to use the keyboard shortcuts here. I'm going to type in LA for layer. I'm going to hit a T for thaw, use my asterisk to thaw all, and I'll turn on with a star, again a wild card. So that turns everything on, thaws everything. Now I can use just the standard scale command. Instead of putting a window around it, I'm going to type in the word all and make sure I get everything in model. The base point, this is critical. Anytime, whether you think you're on the right coordinate system or you know you're going to blow it, always scale by the 0, 0 coordinate. So that is a base point for pretty much every drawing. So always use that. And now it prompts for the scale factor. Now this is something a lot of people don't know. Even those of you that have been using it, I come across a lot of people that aren't aware of this next little thing. Rather than use my handy-dandy calculator and do 1/12 to get a 0.083333, AutoCAD does allow you to just type in 1/12. And the good thing about that is there's no rounding involved, so it's going to be as exact as it can be. So now, undoubtedly I've messed up my coordinates. I'm going to use this button here, which is layer previous, which turns everything back off that I didn't have to begin with. And now, when I do a distance, you can see that that's now 9 feet, and when I check that property, I'm also back to a recognizable dimension here, so 77.98. So, and that's kind of it as far as really making sure what you have in that drawing composition before you get started making a lot of changes. So let's see what's next. So next, when we're preparing these files, our goal is to create new 2-dimensional and or 3-dimensional polylines for all of our critical pieces. And when I say new, that doesn't mean you totally ignore what's there, but you use as much of it as you can. But in the end, you want a set of polylines that you know you can trust. You do not just take the lines, the polylines, the arcs, and all of that are given to you and assume they're correct. You really want to do some checking there. So, and of course, the reason we say polylines as opposed to our goal is to create polylines is because Carlson goes to town with polylines. All of their big-time tools for elevating are based on using polylines. So that's where we want to get. We want Carlson to do as much work for us as possible. So one of the most important things you can do is manage your layers well, and I'm going to show you some of that. And then the order of operation is really critical as far as saving you time, effort, and energy. We always try to save picks and clicks. So I'll show you a couple things, and it'll probably, hopefully be real obvious to you of how the order of operation, you can save, sometimes hours if you do certain things before you do others. And a lot of times that's something you just end up having to learn, because on one project it may be beneficial for you to do it in A, B, C order, and the next time it may be more beneficial to go B then A then C. So what are our 2D and 3D polylines? Contours. So we're going to look at checking and making sure our existing contours are in good shape, proposed buildings, proposed parking areas, and then of course any spot elevations that we're going to need. So I will switch back over now, and we're going to look at a different drawing. So I think I'll just close this one. And again, now we've got a case where we have a lot of different layout tabs. And for those of you, again, that are not terribly familiar with Paperspace, pretty much each one of these tabs represents a sheet that's going to be plotted for this project. So each sheet is shown as a different tab, but everything in the model space is really our project information. These are our project entities. So let's see. First thing we want to look at is really what layers we have. So if I pull this down, you know, I see a lot of layers here. A lot of them don't necessarily make a lot of sense to me. And this command that Carlson has, and anybody that's been in a webinar with me knows this is one of my favorite ones, but it's the layer inspector. So under the inquiry, I'm going to go to layer inspector. Now if you've never been here before, one button that you will have to turn on is this isolate button. The other one that I have checked is restore view on exit. What you get in here is on the left you have every layer that's in this drawing, and I'm going to just kind of scroll down until I see something. And I'm not going to work with every layer in the drawing. There can be thousands. So for instance, if I select on DMO fence, I can kind of guess DMO stands for demolition. And I'm going to hold my shift key down because I can pick more than one layer. So I've got all of my demolition layers, and if I zoom in here close enough, you can see these are to be removed. Well, as part of what I'm doing, I don't really need to see this. So, but this may be something that, you know, kind of be nice, but I'd like to get them off of all these layers. I'm going to use the rename option. So I have 4 layers that I'm going to rename, and it's basically going to move everything on those layers onto one that I'm just going to put an off in front of, and I make a very logical layer name for this. And the reason I put off, it just means it's not important to me. You can say junk or anything that you want. And I'm going to pick OK. Notice there's also an erased entity, so if it really is not important to me, I would have erased them. But who knows, I may need to go back to it. Now again, I'm not going to do everything and go through every single layer. I actually, of course, it's a project I've worked with before, so I know that there are at least a few layers that are going to be important. Remember, the things we're going to elevate are contours. We need to check those and or elevate them. Spot elevations, our proposed buildings and proposed curbs and parking areas. So I know that I've looked at this. This layer right here is my proposed spot elevations for the entire project. So I'm going to rename that, and I usually will put my initials or put good and then give it that logical name. So it's good, it's proposed spot elevations. So I've just changed that layer name. I can also see that GDP, that's my grading proposed. So these are my proposed contours. So I'm going to rename it so it's something that I know. Okay, so I've got my contours, I've got my spot elevations. The GDX layers are my existing grading. So there's the index, there are the labels, there are the minor contours. For what I'm doing, I'd just as soon have them all 3 on one, so I've selected them all. And I'll rename these to something logical that makes sense to me. And then 2 other things I really need are my proposed buildings and my proposed parking. So I'll scroll down, and I know these start with site. So site P building looks like it may be my building. But if I select it, I don't quite get it. I think maybe that's it, but I'm not seeing it. So I'll skip over that, and site PV CNG, that's my proposed curb and gutter. So I'll rename that to something that I recognize. And other than the buildings, I think we're good. This is all of my existing, so that's existing buildings. When I'm done here, I'm just going to pick my exit. Takes a second because I had the button turned on for restore view on exit. Everything that I had turned on when I went into that command comes back on for me now. And if I look in my list of layers, here are all of the good layers that I've just created. Here's my off demolition. So those have all those entities have been moved over. And I'm just going to set one of them current. So I'll set eContours current. And then again, I'm going to use my keyboard type in to go to my layer command. And I'll freeze star, so that's going to freeze everything, and then I'm going to thaw everything that starts with good. And you can see I've got all of that good information. This is exactly what I wanted to see. This is the important stuff to me for my project. And so now I'm ready to get started evaluating what kind of information. I'm going to pick a Save button. And let's start off with our existing contours. So I'll use the button here for Layer Isolate and select those. They're all on the same layer, so I didn't actually need to do all of that. So let's see where we are elevation-wise by using Carlson's View and then 3D Viewer Window. Now I don't have a surface model built, but I can go to 3D Viewer Window and see anything that's elevated. So I'll just window everything. Now if you've never been in here, when you first get in, that color by elevation is turned off. If you turn it on, you get a real good indicator and problems jump out at you pretty quickly. So when we turn that on, you can see it's colored everything by elevation, but also on the left side here, it's showing me the elevation range. And I see a 214, it's that blue line, so I've already got a suspicion that I've got a problem. And I'm going to tip this up, and I can absolutely see that I have a problem. Now this one's right in the middle. It's going to be pretty easy to find and to pick and to try to fix when I get back to plan view. But in case it's not, let's say this is one little teeny smidge of a contour, you need to find it, you need to fix it. But you can't pick it here, you can't really change it here, or can you? So this is a part that a lot of people don't realize is on this button here on the control panel, I can switch to a pick mode, and if I double click on that line, I do get a few editing options. So I could change its layer, I could set it to 0, I could add it to selection. So I'm going to add the selection, and it's not anything you're going to see here. And then to get back to the normal rotation mode, you would pick this button. So that's what allows me to kind of go back to here. And then I'll exit out of this box. Now I've added it to the selection. What good does that get me? Well, I'll go over to Properties. And this little button right here allows me, I don't have anything selected in the drawing yet. If I pick this, it'll now prompt me at the command line for Select Objects. And I just type a P, which is previous. So when we told it to add it to the selection set, that means I can hit a P here and it shows me anything that was previously selected. So that's what that does. Now that it's selected, I can go over here, I can see every bit of information. The elevation is 209, and if I zoom in here, it should be 299. So I've got something to fix. And again, kind of in the interest of showing people, there's a lot of different ways to fix that, but this is just one way you may not be aware of. Under 3D data, I can set polyline to elevation by selecting that text, and then I can select the polyline. So now when I select it, you can see it's changed that polyline to elevation 299. And if I really want to kind of feel warm and fuzzy, I can go in and select everything once more. And you can see that I have fixed that. It wasn't just that fixed the entire polyline. It wasn't just one vertex. Okay, so another thing we always want to make sure of when we elevate contours, if we need to build a surface from the contours, is we always, hate to say it, we want to fix gaps across a label. So gaps across that label can really do some funky things with a surface model. So it's just a matter of I'm on the right layer for one, and drawing a polyline from endpoint to endpoint, and then I'll use Carlson's join nearest command, and obviously I would do this to the entire project. And you can see that that's connected there. So that's going to make a much neater, much cleaner surface model for that existing surface. All right, so next, let's look at, I'm going to unisolate, and then I'll pick isolate once again. Let's now look at our proposed contours. I'm going to go through the same thing. We're going to find some different problems. So in my viewer, I got an option here to ignore zero elevations. So if I ignore zeros, you can see I have barely anything. The elevations are horrendous. Turn the ignore it zeros off. So most of it's at zero, some of it's not, and what's not is spiking. So this is as bad as it's going to get. It really is. So we've got to fix all of this, because to build a surface model, we need all of these contours to be elevated. So when you see an issue like this, actually one other thing I want to check is what kind of entities they are. So if I select it, one of the easiest ways to do it is through your properties. And when I pull down the drop down, I can see that the great majority here are lines and arcs, very few polylines. So, that's going to be a problem for us. We definitely need to connect everything together. And now we're starting to look at, if you remember from the slide, the order of operations matter, because there's a smart way to do this and a not so smart way. So rather than go through and try to figure out which ones are elevated, which ones are not, which ones, if you get in a situation where the great majority needs to be elevated or has wrong elevations, or even the ones that are elevated you may not trust, I would always recommend, it's going to be easier in the long run. It seems like it's going to take longer, but trust me, it's usually better this way, to just take everything that's 3D down to 2D zero elevation. So here I'm going to enter a zero elevation. The prompt says to select all circles, lines, arcs, polylines, and I pick enter. And now again, just as a check, if I look at my 3D viewer window and I ignore zero elevations, everything's gone. So everything is at zero now. Now what's our next step? We still have lines, we have polylines. I'm going to use another Carlson command to elevate some of these contours, maybe one you haven't used before. And if you look at all of the different pieces, order of operations matters. Doesn't it make sense that I would want to connect across this first for all of these? So first step would be to connect these. I'm not going to do all of them, I'm just going to do a couple. Next step would be to do a join nearest, which joins all common layers, all common elevations where common endpoints meet. So now, instead of elevating several pieces of this, I elevate it one time, and it would get the whole thing had I gone through the whole process. So that's the order of operation. Pay attention to it, think your way through it, save yourself a lot of time. So the command I'm going to use is to assign contour elevations using multiple in series. So what that allows, actually, you know what? I forgot to do something. I'm actually going to do a join nearest on the entire thing because I want as many of these connected. I think I just did it on this little group down here, but I wanted to hit this. So 3D data, assign contour elevations, multiple in series. So what I can do here, I'll turn my O snaps off, and it just asks me to drag a line across those contours. The first elevation that I cross is a 275, and I'm going downhill. So it updated 7 polylines, and if I use my drawing inspector you can see that it's now elevated these, so they're no longer 0 elevations. So using that command is a good way to hit a bunch of contours all in one fell swoop. So again, that's just one little, hopefully that's a little tip that maybe you weren't aware of that'll save you some time. All right, next thing we're going to look at, let's go try to, well, we've got our curb, so let's try to, actually let's look at our buildings first. So we don't have buildings, we've got to find those buildings. And I'm going to use this button to go back and just turn all those layers back on. I'm just going to set the previous layers because I do have the buildings shown here. You can see a lot of different colors. It looks like a lot of different layers. It's a block, so I'm going to isolate that. And when I isolate, you can see I got the same thing. It is that Site P building we saw through the layer inspector. But that's not what I needed. So I'm going to show you, and again, I've done this on a couple webinars and gotten a lot of good comments in the follow-up questions. So here's an easy way to fix this. So I'm going to go and select this. I want to make a copy of it way off to the side. And just to show you how bad it is, if I thaw and turn on all the layers, it's even worse than we may even imagine, because look at all of that mess. So this is and I'm going to undo to get that back, but this is a nested block. So this came from the architect. It's got every doorknob, every toilet, everything in here. We just don't need it. Really what I would like to do, and all I want to do, is be able to put a closed polyline around each of those building pads. That's all I need. I need to be able to see the footprint. But unless I can isolate and actually see the building, it's going to be a nightmare to even try to go around in this. So I'm going to show you an easy way to get that entire building isolated, the pieces that you want, because I'd like to see this. So you copy this off to the side, and you're using the explode command. And you continue to use the explode command. You just keep picking the same things. What we're looking for is the number found to equal the number that it tells me are not able to be exploded. That means that when that happens, I will have exploded this as far down to its individual pieces as it can possibly be exploded. So where are we? Okay, so we're still 83 found, 51 not exploded. You can see how many times this has to happen sometimes. All right, so 147 found, 147 not able to be exploded, none found. Now, I've exploded it. Now, I'm going to hit this layer isolate button and only isolate those. I've now dug down. I know the exact layers that I want to see isolated. And when I come over here, that's exactly what I was wanting to see. And you want to do this, we can just erase this. Turn on all the layers, thaw all the layers, erase all the garbage that's come with it. And now this is what we're going to work with. So I'm only going to focus on one building. And I'm going to start a new polyline command. And I'm going to create a new layer to do that. So I'm just going to go to Carlson's Draw 2D Polyline. And the new layer is, actually I'm going to put, you can see where I was practicing. So I'm actually going to do good, tells me it's good information. It's going to be, initially I'm going to draw it as a 0 elevation, but I'm going to elevate it. So I'm going to do good 3D building. And make sure my O snaps are on. And if you'll bear with me, actually I want to show you this. Let me do one other thing. I'm going to turn on one more layer just so you can understand why I'm going to do a couple of things. So when you elevate a building, there needs to be a minimum of 2 polylines for every building. One, you're going to have a polyline elevated to the finished floor, and then there needs to be another polyline just outside of it that represents the ground around the building. So you can see pretty much everywhere around this, it's $299.75 except at the doorways. So when I go around this, I am actually going to take the time to hit kind of every nook and cranny. So if you, like I said, if you can be patient here for a second, I'll go as quick as I can. because I need to, when we do the offset that represents the ground right outside the building, I need to have these nooks and crannies here. Oops. Dave, you got any questions while I'm doing this?
Doing very well, Jennifer. We've had just a couple of questions. One of them was about the change space, which I had not seen before, too. I appreciate that. So I answered that one. Had a comment or question about fixing the coordinates from earlier on when you were changing the scale and the units of the drawing. They asked if you were going to change the coordinates. So you might want to just address that, how you could do that with the move command.
Okay, I can sure do that. Nothing else?
No, doing very well.
All right.
15 minutes, so...
I told you I always run over. Or, well, I'm not going to run over, but I'm going to take it right to the end of things. So, all right, so we've got that 2D zero elevation pad. And again, I should have mentioned this, but when I did that 2D polyline, I could have set that elevation here. But again, I just wanted to hit that command one more time to be able to set polyline to elevation by selecting a piece of text. So I want to set that finish for 2D polyline. Notice that when I selected that, it pulls right on out that elevation. And then I select the polyline. And so now I've elevated that polyline. We can double check it with the inspector. So it's been elevated to 300.5. So turn him back off. Now to set that elevation outside, again, what I'm going to do is, to start with, I'm going to elevate everything to 299.75. And then we're going to go back and fix only two of these little doors. Maybe I'll do the front. So I'm going to go to 3D Polyline Utilities, Offset 3D Polyline. Now a lot of times we're going to use an interval option because I think most times we use this is going to be for a curb line maybe. But I'm going to use a constant option because I want the entire thing to drop to 299.75. So I'm going to offset this out just a smidge, just 0.1, because I don't want any, this is making a wall. This is making a retaining wall. And when we do a wall, we just need a little bit of horizontal separation there. Or we're going to get errors for a vertical face. So the new elevation for the new polyline is going to be 299.75. And I'm going to pick that polyline, select it out here. And if I just do a quick, I like hitting that 3D viewer window pretty regularly. You can see what we've created. So now I need to fix these doorways. And I'm going to use, again, another command that I suspect a lot of people haven't used, is the Edit Assign Polyline Elevations. And I'm going to pick the outside one. Now, it's kind of tough to see because they come in really small, but there's a little grip, a little blue grip, you can kind of see that there, at every corner of that polyline. And they're all numbered on the left. So this is every vertex on that polyline. The ones with the check mark in it are holding the elevations at those two vertices. And anything without a check mark, it's changing, it's interpolating the elevation between the control or the ones that are being held. So what I'm going to do is I need to make this vertex and this vertex 300.5. And I'm going to leave these two where they are. So first, to find them, I'm going to just left pick here. Oops. Nope. There we go. So I left click on it, and it actually highlights it. So that's 64, and let's see, 63, 62, and 61. So those are the four that I'm going to be concerned with. So I'll now pick on number 62, and I'm going to make that elevation 300.50. And then 63, I'll select again, and that one's 300.50. So you can see what those new elevations are. and I'll pan over. I'm just going to do one more and left click on it so that I can identify where it is. So that's number 47. So I'm going to suspect that I have 44, 45, 46, and 47. Again, I'm just going to change these two to 300.50. So it's holding these four in addition to the start and the end. So once more, let's do my 3D viewer. And now you can see what's going on there. So those elevations it bumps it up. It's kind of tough to tell from this angle, but there you go. Did I pick the wrong one? I don't know. We'll see. You get the idea. I think maybe I'll pick the inner one. All right, so the last thing we really want to focus on elevating, and by the way, once you do this, that entire building block is okay to be erased because this is the important part to me. So I would even be able to just erase those out of the drawing, purge it, and get rid of a ton of layers. So with this, I'm going to, let's turn those layers back on again. And I'm going to do my layer freeze and then thaw. Good. And now I just want to look at my pavement. All right, so now you can see that on one layer I've got striping, I've got edge of pavement, gutter line, curb, everywhere, ramps. So, and this is kind of my method. When I start, I want to elevate one or the other. I want to elevate edge of pavement or back of curb. Don't do both. Just find one that is the most complete. And it looks like with all these, with the ramps, my edge of pavement is going to be the most complete. I always kind of point out, look for these and erase those because I'm going to join nearest here. And if I leave that selected, it's going to tie in my edge of pavement and my back of curb. So I'll do a join nearest, select everything. And now, if I look, it's actually nicely connected. So I've got this, 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 and this that are good 2D closed polylines for me. And I'm actually going to do an offset to a layer. And the new layer is going to be good. And I'll do 3D BOC for back of curb. And it's 2 feet. So I'm just going to quickly go around and pick that. And I would want to do all 4 polylines. And you can't really see a difference because it put it all in the same layer. But if I, actually let me just do an isolate. Oh, of course. There we go. So let me just turn that one on, set it current, and I'm going to freeze everything. So these are good 2D polylines for my back of curb that I can now elevate and make them 3D. Now to do that, I need those spot elevations. And the other thing that I need are my proposed contours. And I am getting down to my time here, so I'm going to kind of blow through this, and anybody, again, that has more questions afterward can follow up with me. But let me tell you the things that you need to make sure of when you are doing and planning to elevate your curb lines. What I like to do is just do normal Carlson draw locate points and set up my elevation, or sorry, my layer. And some of these are real obvious. So here it's very obvious that I'm going to set this elevation to 298.50, and I'm going to give it a good description for back of curb. Some of these may not be too obvious. So I may need to set an elevation at 299 where this contour crosses, because that's what it's actually telling me. So I'm going to go to the nearest, and where that would cross, make it 299. Another place, and I'm trying to find, I don't really see a real good example, but you've got some cases, this one may be a good one, where you may have a contour that just kind of grazes that gutter line but never hits the back of curb. Well, you would need to set an elevation on that back of curb. Let's say that's the case here. So what's the elevation on that back of curb? It's going to be 301.5. So don't forget those as you see them. Also remember that if you have any catch basins or drop inlets, whether they're in the middle of your parking area, set points on them. They're going to be critical for your surface. If they're in the corner, you may be given the top of grade elevation, and you may need to set an elevation on the back of curb that that kind of meets that extra half a foot of elevation difference. All right, so I'm going to kind of wrap up here real quick, but I've got what's mostly, I'm glad I had this one kind of ready. I've pretty much followed everything on this example. You can see all the spot elevations that have been set. The other thing that you're going to want to make sure to do, and it hadn't been, yeah, it has. Notice that after I've elevated, all right, I'm getting in a rush here because we're getting close. Let me freeze my existing contours. And let's look at a view of this real quick. So you can see all of this has been elevated. I've got my curb lines. You can see contours coming right up to my building. I've got my ground outside the building. So I've got contours in the parking lot. I've got elevated edge of pavement, elevated back of curb. To really keep from having problems in your surface, this is another step that you need to make sure to take. And I will try to freeze some of these points so it's a little more obvious. Now we use the spot elevations and we use the proposed contours to elevate either the edge of pavement or back of curb. After we elevate either the edge of pavement or back of curb, we go to 3D Polyline Utilities and do an offset. That's how we create the other one. So you elevate one based on all the known information, keep it uniform, do that offset 3D Polyline. After you do that, go back in and trim out where those contours would have crossed and create a conflict. Because, again, we don't want to create that bit of vertical face. So I go in, and you can see I've just kind of trimmed it out. Now it's still going to elevate. It's going to triangulate properly. But what we've done is kept it from having two different elevations in the same XY point. So, again, sorry, I always end up going right to the time. Dave, if you got any questions, I'll go ahead and answer those. And then after we hit the other questions, I'll go back and answer the move question for the other example.
Well, Jennifer, you've done a terrific job. There's no questions at this time, other than the gentleman that wanted to see the move coordinate, or the how to handle that coordinate change after rescaling and changing the units in the drawing.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just go back and hit the Carlson webinars one more time. Oh, I forgot to update this one. So, but these are the next webinars that are coming up. So appreciate everyone's time and hope to see you on another webinar soon. All right. So we'll talk to the surveyor. This is limits. Let's pretend this is a property line. And we have a known elevation, a known northing and easting of what that point should be. So in this case, you can see I'm already on an assumed coordinate system, so I'm already at 5,000-ish. Let's say we want to move this project because we know that that corner should be at 10,000, 10,000. So again, I'm going to make sure to turn everything on, thaw everything. And I'm going to do, now I've got points set in here. I don't actually have a coordinate file associated with this one, but I'll show you how to fix that as well. So you really want to do this first before you start elevating, before you build surfaces. This is one of the first steps. But I'm just going to simply use the move command and type in all. And when it asks for a base point, the point that I'm using as a reference is that endpoint right here. And the known northing and easting on that, I'm going to type in 10,000, 10,000. And what that means is the point that I picked a second ago, that corner of the limits, I'm moving it now so that it's going to be at 10,000, 10,000. I've never seen that before. I'm going to say yes. And I assume that's what it had to do in order to move everything. And now, if I ID that point, I'm just going to type in ID and left pick. You can see that it has indeed moved it. Now, if it's been rotated, that's kind of a different story. I think you're going to find it most often that if it's been rotated, again, I would just encourage somebody to go to my website, and that document really tells you how to rotate it correctly. But you can also just kind of do the same thing, having two known points, two known coordinates. You can do a rotate the same way if you need to, but Dave, you can pop in here if you want. And I don't find it that rotating it is something you have to do as often as you have to move it. So.
Yeah, occasionally you do, so it's always good to check just to make sure, double check.
You want to check 2 points. You always want to have 2 known points, and that's going to tell you if the position and the rotation is correct.
Right. And you can do the same kind of IDing steps to check bearings against what you see annotated on the plat.
Yeah, and in case we have people here who are just desperately curious, let me see if I can get this right. If we want to make up an example here, let's say that we want to rotate this, and we know that this line needs to be on that bearing. So our 2 known points are here and here. We know that bearing. So the command is just going to be rotate, and I'm going to select, actually do it my old way, do all, except I need to unselect that line. So I held shift, unselected the line. The base point is going to be the end point right here, so I'm snapping to that end point. And here I'm going to use a reference. So notice that I've got an option for reference. The reference angle is my original angle. So I'm going to pick end point here and end point here. And now the new angle, see how everything's twisting and rotating with me? The new angle is right out here. So if you have 2 known points, that's the way to rotate it using that reference angle. Now I do just real quick want to mention points in case you have to do this after you have a coordinate file, a CRD file associated. Under coordinate file utilities, yeah, fine. There is a button here for update the CRD file from the drawing, so just be very, very careful with this. I would probably make a copy of the CRD file just in case and have a backup. But what you've done here is change the location of the points in the drawing. So you have a conflict. So your drawing says one thing where the points are located, your CRD file says another. Depending on which is right, you can pick one of these 2 buttons and it'll update the other. So hopefully that covered that. Anything else?
That's it. Great job today. Sure appreciate
All right. I need to give one quick. I'd forgotten at the beginning. Dave and I talked ahead, and I am doing this this little webinar as a drive-by webinar. So I'm on the road today, and I want to thank the guys and Reed Adams at Kuntz Bryant here in Richmond, Virginia. So I'm driving from Raleigh to Baltimore, and they were halfway and were kind enough to offer me an office. So appreciate them helping out for this.
Great.